Hi, thanks for having me here tonight. I'm particularly excited to come right now because we've just come off of a really exciting wave of action over the last couple of weeks as we're getting ready for the final big campaign push in the run-up to Cancun. So it's a great time to be trying to talk to you about what's happening with civil society on climate change. Just a brief introduction to the Tick, Tick, Tick campaign and the global campaign for climate action, because I presume not everyone here knows who we are. We're an alliance, fairly loose alliance of more than 250 organizations, environment groups, faith groups, trade unions. We've got, the Red Cross and the YMCA, as well as traditional organizations working on climate, such as Greenpeace, Oxfam, etc. We came together in the run-up to Copenhagen, where the thing that united all of these groups was calling for a fair, ambitious, and binding treaty, a FAB treaty, we called it. The campaign is characterized by a number of things. First off, global days of action. Last year we had two big ones. This was the September 21st wake-up call. This isn't not clicking. This isn't working. Okay. Outreach to mass audiences through celebrity engagement. We did a lot of rapid response to political opportunities and late developments. This is having a mind of its own here. We were shining a spotlight on the negotiations, providing a link between inside discussions and what was happening to civil society on the outside. We did a lot of mobilizing of opinion formers. We had a lot of channels of communications, including Facebook, Twitter. We had a climate insider listserv, had about 500, still do have about 500 top bloggers, editors, etc., sharing content. We had a fresh air center, a physical space in Copenhagen, where people came together and shared their thoughts about what was happening in the negotiations. We did online mobilization. By late December, we had more than 15 million people signed up to the call for the Fair, Ambitious, and Binding Treaty. And we did mass mobilization on the ground. We had about 100,000 people on the streets of Copenhagen on December 12th. One of the most important roles of the GCCA is to aggregate and amplify the efforts of all of our partner organizations. They don't agree on everything, they don't have agreed policy positions, etc., but we're all united in this call, and so we tend to support each other's campaigns. And it's also about alignment where possible. So for example, in the final hours of the last night in Copenhagen, we organized a joint message that resulted in a homepage website takeover. So for around 24 hours, the homepages of many of our partner organizations ran with this message that we're not done yet. Governments weren't done, and we weren't either. So that brings us to 2010 and the road to Cancun, which, as everyone knows, it's pretty clear that governments aren't really ready to give up their entrenched positions. But I think with all of the negative reporting about that, it's important to note that there's a lot of positive things going on. In particular, a new phenomenon has really begun to emerge. It's a hands-on, roll up your sleeves, let's just get down to business sort of attitude that's beginning to fill the vacuum. And I think there's a much greater recognition that we're all in this same boat and it's sinking, and we really need to get together now and start to plug the holes. I would say we are seeing the beginning of a paradigm shift. I know the cynics among you will just kind of laugh that off, and I can't tell you how many different NGO campaigns over the years I've been involved with in which we've said, oh, we've got to create a paradigm shift, it's time for the new thing to come in. I actually really believe that we are seeing that now. Large developing countries are seeing the competitive advantages to switching to a low-carbon economy. Countries like India, South Korea, the Philippines, South Africa. As you know, China last year invested something like $34 billion in clean energy technology, making them the world's leader. South Korea just announced in the last couple of weeks that it's investing $36 billion in the next 5 years, which will put it into the top 5. Small countries are pledging to go carbon neutral. They're not waiting around for the governments to fix it all. They're actually starting to roll up their sleeves and take action. And I think it's also important to note it's not just the developing countries and the small countries, but the EU, for example, last year, for the first time, more than 50% of new electrical power installations came from renewables. And there's a roadmap that gets the EU to 100% electricity supply by 2050. And likewise in the US, something like 40% of all new electrical installations last year came from wind. The GCCA is bringing this message to governments, for example, at the UNFCCC negotiations, just most recently in China. We're talking about this positive message. Instead of preaching on about how we're all in trouble and the whole thing's going nowhere, we think it's important to start to communicate this change, this fact that people are really starting to get on with it. And this culminated, I think, in a really big peak in the last couple of weeks with the 10-10-10 Global Day of Action, Global Work Party. There were 7,347 registered events in 188 countries. These activities were not just symbolic. It was a day of doing. It was people rolling up their sleeves, planting trees, installing solar panels, collecting garbage, etc. And the message to governments was really, we're doing our part, now you need to do yours. And that 10-10-10 Day of Action was not just a single day. There was also follow-on events, for example, on the World Anti-Poverty Day. On the 17th of October, the Global Call to Action Against Poverty reached out to governments drawing the links between climate change and poverty. On the 16th, Oxfam and others ran a campaign called Sow the Seed, which was drawing attention to climate change and food production. It was World Food Day, etc. And this momentum, this wave of action didn't go unnoticed. We got a lot of comments and notes of congratulations, for example, from Christiana Figueres, from Mary Robinson, from Ban Ki-moon. And I should also emphasize that this new momentum, this change in attitude is not just from the converted, it's not just from the traditional environmentalists. You may have seen this New York Times article. It was all over Twitter and Facebook and everything in the last week or so, because this is an article about how in the heartland, in Kansas, in the core of Tea Party territory, people are actually changing their lives. Even climate skeptics are recognizing that actually cleaner energy, conserving energy, et cetera, is a good thing for a large number of reasons. To be a little bit provocative here, I would say that the media is lagging behind to a certain extent. I think there's a continued focus on the circus between climate deniers versus believers. There was an editorial in Nature magazine last week, you may have seen, which suggested that the reason for this is that news organizations are largely in the business of entertainment. And when you've got an issue such as climate and green energy, et cetera, which is really a slow boil, you don't have the kind of dramatic day-to-day revelations, et cetera. What happens is you get trumped-up controversies. For example, ClimateGate, the errors in the IPCC report, et cetera, they get blown out of all proportion, and it becomes a story in and of itself. So I would like to just argue that journalists, as we said, governments need to do their part as well. I think journalists need to do their part as well. I think that some people say that the notion of renewables and whatever is a worthy but dull sort of a topic. I would say that those who are going to be remembered in 10 years' time are going to be those who actually recognized this paradigm shift, who actually find creative ways to report on it, and to bring it to the people. The people who report on ClimateGate, et cetera, are not going to be remembered. So I would just like to say that you know, in the medical profession, the very first rule is do no harm, and I'm thinking that conscientious journalists should adopt the same sort of credo, and continuing to report about the skeptics, believers debate is really doing a lot more harm, and I think that it's time for journalists to contribute substantially to educating the public about what's really going on and what's really important here. Thank you.